All right, we're live. We're here today with another Infinite Layers. Today we're joined by Hyperlane, and we're joined by Jon, who is the founder. So, Jon, do you mind giving us an introduction to yourself, but also to what Hyperlane is?
Of course, yeah. So first, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Um, as for myself, I am the founder of Hyperlane and the CEO of Abacus Works, which is like core contributor to Hyperlane, one of the development companies that works on it. I'm realizing I'm old, and someone was asking like, "Oh, how long have you been in crypto?" Like, "Oh, damn! Like in January, it will be 8 years." Um, and so it's
That's
getting up
definitely
there.
OG.
Yeah, it's always funny to me too, because like you know, uh, I still don't. It doesn't feel that way in a sense of like I still feel like oh I got in, but there's all these friends I have and people that I've met who are like oh they've been much longer. But then you like look at the calendar, you're like fuck, it's August 2024. Damn, time has really flied here. Now before I started Hyperlane, I was co-leading the investment team at Galaxy. So if people are familiar with like Mike Novogratz's firm. I did that with a very fine gentleman and a good friend called Michael Jordan, who is every bit as interesting as the other famous Michael Jordans. And he went on to start his firm, which is doing great things called DBA. And throughout that time, you're navigating crypto, and I remember getting really into the idea of Ethereum as like a permissionless internet computer that anyone could do whatever they want with. And at the time, I'm at Morgan Stanley, and everyone on the trading desk is so worried about the automation that's coming, and it's coming for their jobs, right? So we work with like a bunch of really clever 40, 50, sometimes slightly even older folks who have been on this trading desk for a really long time. And they would tell stories about how, like, the Goldman trading floor for equities used to have 50 traders. Now it's 2 people, and they basically just manage the algorithms. And that's going to happen here too. We were trading municipal bonds, so like a fairly opaque part of the market. And I remember hearing about Ethereum over the weekend and coming back to the trading desk on Monday after like doing a whole dive into it because I refuse to use the term going down the rabbit hole. I won't say it. Uh, and I come in and I'm like, guys, you have no idea what's coming. You're worried about the bidders. You're worried about like the algos. You have no idea what's coming. This thing Ethereum's coming, and we're all going to be out of a job in like 10 years because of it, not because of the smart guy over there who's writing the algorithm. Uh, and then you're like, okay, well, you learn that wait, these internet computers can't talk to each other. Like, oh, that seems a little bit strange. So from the moment I entered crypto, like professionally, I was kind of waiting for something that would solve this as a problem. Like, how the hell can you have these internet computers just navigating the world, people using them, building software on them, building these permissionless applications? They're not going to talk to each other? No way. And it kept on being one of those things that was like a big basketball fan. And some scouts like saying, oh, that guy, he's a year away from being a year away. And that's what interoperability felt like. It was a year away from being a year away. 2021 rolls around. You're like, we're still not there. We're getting close, but we're still not there. And chance meeting, someone's like, hey, come join us to talk about this thing. And that thing turned into what is today is Hyperlane. So I can go into like a little bit more about what Hyperlane is.
That's really cool. Yeah, I think that there's this idea that crypto moves very fast, but also very slow. In terms of how it moves slow, to actually build something, it's just very complex to essentially get over all of the different barriers that we currently have because we're dealing with a lot more constraints with the types of systems. But sometimes you look back and you're like, wow, compared to where we were like 2, 3, 4 years ago, it's much different today. Because now, for instance, you can pick up any device. Most people have Venmo or Robinhood or one of these apps, which are essentially now supporting crypto. You look at some of the numbers of like Tron or USDC and how stable coins are starting to become adopted around the world. And things like that, we don't really kind of see and, happen all at once. It just happens slowly. But when you kind of start comparing them to other things, it's crazy. But yeah, for Hyperlane specifically, what is Hyperlane and how does it work?
Perfect. Let's get into it. So what Hyperlane is, it's an open framework for interoperability. Like the idea was, by that point in time, you'd seen that there were systems that work fairly well for like, if what you want to do is move assets between different chains. There's a way to do it, but it is pretty permission, right? Like you need to talk to a team, you go through a process with them. Once they're convinced, like they see the business case, they're gonna come on in and they will like give you that support. And you're there and you're sitting there like, wait a second, I'm looking at where the landscape is, and this doesn't make sense if there's like 100 chains. There's gonna be basically as many chains as there are websites if we are, correct in our broader thesis on crypto. And so, how's one team going to do that? Imagine if like everyone had to go and speak to one person or like to a group of people at one entity if they wanted to make sure that their apps, that their websites can work basically everywhere. Seemed like that wasn't going to happen. So you had to go back to basics and say, how can we design this as a kind of like maximally permissionless system? Luckily, it was a good blueprint. IBC was a good blueprint. And so some of the people who came up with IBC were kind enough to spend a lot of time on Hyperlane in kind of those really early days. And I'd like to think of it as just, hey, we looked at IBC and like, this is the best way to do this today. But what trade-offs would you make if you wanted to make it like maximally extensible, basically? Can go to as many environments as you'd like, can be handled by someone like in the lightest way possible. And that's where we came up with Hyperlane. And before I get any deeper into like how it works, if there's any questions from you guys, happy to take them.
Yeah, in terms of what you kind of are thinking of in terms of interacting with it for developers or use cases, what are some of the major things that you think will be unlocked by this sort of product, system, or protocol?
So the biggest thing that it unlocks really today is that like someone, while they're listening to us now, can go and thanks to the efforts of many people, Eigenlayer included, it's becoming easier and easier and easier to launch your own chain. Like I would say, in simple terms, basically the cost, which would include the effort, the dollar cost, the time you need to spend, all of that cost with launching a new chain, that's trending towards zero. It's not zero yet, but it's trending there. And so in a few minutes, you can go on something like Caldera or Conduit, and you can launch your own rollup. And now with Hyperlane, with a little bit more than a few minutes, I'll be honest, probably take you a good hour or two if it's your first time around with it. You can deploy Hyperlane on it, operate all of that additional infrastructure, and get connected with any chain that already has Hyperlane. And so when you really think about like, hey, I just created a new chain, well, that's awesome. But once it's just created, it's kind of like, oh, it's a new island in the middle of the ocean. Like, how does it connect with the mainland? And that is really what people want when they create a new chain. They want to be able to bring activity there. And so you need those channels, those routes to connect you back to the mainland. And so that's the main thing that it unlocks today. Like anyone with some software engineering background can pick up the Hyperlane CLI, get started, deploy it on their new chain, get connected with other chains that have it, and then they're off to the races, right? So this thing that up until now they needed basically to really go through some type of business development process with another entity and get approved, and sometimes takes months, right? So like takes them 5 minutes to launch their chain, but then it might take them 3 months before one of the ultimate purveyors of interoperability is going to get their chain connected with others, but not anymore. And so today there are actually multiple chains in production where they're running Hyperlane completely by themselves. And whether it's Stride, big player in the Cosmos, like the staking arena, or Forma, or Kerak, and a few others that are all like self-hosting this, that array of people who are doing this, taking this on themselves, keeps getting larger. And the thing they usually do to start is some type of bridging. In Hyperlane parlance, we call those warp routes. The idea was to keep it space themed. Hyperlane is like a Star Wars reference, even though I'm much more of a Star Trek kind of guy, but one of our namers here is a big Star Wars fan. And they let you in a kind of out of the box way using our CLI, basically get bridge any type of asset from an existing chain that has Hyperlane to yours and vice versa. Actually, maybe I'll share my screen
Yeah,
here.
let's take a look, and if you have any presentation or demo.
Yeah. Let's go here. All right, StreamYard working. There we go. So here we're looking at basically like a diagram that illustrates the basic architectural schematic of like how does Hyperlane work. And so for a Hyperlane integration, you really need three things. First, you need the contracts. And so the main one that you'd need on your chain is what we call the mailbox. Think of the mailbox as basically like the main interface that a developer interacts with. It is the thing that your app's contracts face and interact with, and they encode some message that includes some type of like arbitrary bytes. Those bytes can say anything from, hey guys, how are you doing? I wouldn't recommend to do that per se, but you can do that. To as nuanced as, hey, you're going to move these assets from this chain to that chain, or you're going to trigger this function call. Like let's say it's a lending protocol that accepts collateral on chain A, but then releases the borrowed amounts on chain B. So you need that mailbox. That's the first piece. Then the second piece is what in Hyperlane we call an interchain security module. And this is where Hyperlane really differs from most interoperability protocols today, because whereas others usually tightly couple the concept of messaging, which really is like the product itself, like I want to connect between two chains, and they very tightly couple it with the security. Hyperlane decouples those things. And so the messaging interface, excuse my typo here, and the security modules are separate. And what that means is that anything that provides a state attestation or a state proof can be used as a security module for Hyperlane. So there are instances of where that security just comes in the form of economic security. You have some validators providing at state attestations and then putting their money where their mouth is and providing economic security to the system. And that's where something like the Hyperlane AVS comes in. You could have a system that is as simple as like, hey, it's just a bunch of validators on a multisig. You could do more complex thing like an optimistic system, or even something that uses something like ZK proofs. And right now there's a team working on bringing, say, Succinct's SP1 prover as a Hyperlane module. So if the first piece was the mailbox, the second is the security module. The third and final piece is what we call the relayer. This relayer, it's really not complicated. It doesn't play a role in the security of the system. It's kind of just like a delivery person. It sits in between the chains that you want to connect. It observes the mailbox. It sees, hey, John is trying to send something from, say, Ethereum to Solana. And it looks at that mailbox, sees that incoming message. Everything there looks valid. And then sees, oh, okay, so a certain security module has signed off on this. I'm going to take this to over to Solana, and then I'll process it. That transaction hits the mailbox on Solana, runs through the security module there. The signatures from the original security module are verified again, and then it gets to its destination. So that's like the most basic how Hyperlane works. It is certainly quite simple, I'd like to think. Sometimes people find it to be like a little bit more complex. There's a lot of complexity that you can get into as you get deeper into the weeds, but at the most basic level, this is what Hyperlane is and kind of how it works. And now the cool thing is everything that we've talked about so far is totally open source. And, you know, where it used to be like slightly less accessible today through the Hyperlane CLI, you can get all of these components running. And again, someone who is like listening to us right now could go on the Hyperlane docs, dive into that CLI, and they could do all of this themselves. One of the best parts is no one here would even know that they did that until they told us. Now there's a registry on the main Hyperlane GitHub where people can submit a pull request in like a standard format that says, hey, I just deployed Hyperlane on this chain. Here's like all the basic information that you need to know so that people have a better sense of like, oh, how many chains Hyperlane is on, like which ones are operating. And a very nice developer in the community just built like a cool little dashboard called Hyperchains, where they visualize that registry. And you can see it growing. It's approaching about 100 chains at the moment, which feels like a nice enough milestone. And through this, you can do all sorts of things. You can do some of those warp routes that we talked about before. You can do things like what Superform, which is a pretty active app on Hyperlane, does, which is allow you to accept deposits from any chain and then earn yield on separate chains that they're connected to. Aave uses Hyperlane for governance messages alongside Layer 0 and Chainlink. And so when the DAO on Ethereum processes like a governance change that would force maybe a code update, those commands are communicated through those protocols to the other kind of, call it like child DAOs on different chains. And so that was a lot. So, maybe I'll stop there for a second and we can get deeper into any one of the different features and some of the cool things that people can do with Hyperlane already today.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things that people talk about when they talk about the trade-offs or challenges with the modular thesis or the roll-up roadmap, or the fact that people are building these individual like app chains for specific products, or just the fact that we're seeing more and more roll-ups, is the fragmentation and the interoperability. And this is obviously like a solution to kind of try to solve that. In terms of network support, is this focused on any specific type of VM, or is this something that can work with what can be built right now, like which VMs interact with this?
Great question. So in production, 3 different types of VMs today. Of course, the EVM, but also Solana and by extension the SVM and Cosm Wasm. But part of the beauty of having a completely open framework like this is that suddenly other people from other ecosystems realize, wait a second, I can convert this to support my use case. And then it's not like I'm doing work for somebody else that then benefits from it. I can totally operate this myself. So what we've seen, actually, both the Cosmos work and the Solana work originated with teams external to the Hyperlane core team, and then carried over the finish line and now today in production. And there are several other teams that have been converting Hyperlane for the VM that they're operating on. And so the Movement Labs team bringing it for Move. A team called Pragma, which is one of the leading oracles on Starknet, has just finished the Starknet implementation. The Cadena team has been working on one, the Rootstock team. There's a few others as well that, just for brevity, we won't mention. But that's what basically having a completely open design lets you do. Suddenly other people realize like, oh, I can actually really benefit from this. It could solve a major problem for me. And once I do the implementation work, it's not like I am doing this kind of as a contribution to someone else. I can take this, I can operate this, I can even monetize this. And I think that's created a lot of developer engagement with Hyperlane.
Very cool. So, like, can you interrupt between the
VMs?
VMs? Like, is there interoperability between like Move and EVM theoretically when Move comes?
Yes. So today you can already do that between Solana EVM, Cosmos EVM, and while no one's made those routes yet,
Right,
You
right.
could even do between, say, like there are routes between like Cosmos and EVM, and between EVM and Solana. No one's yet done a route between Solana and like Cosmos, but there are some that will we anticipate being released quite soon, just kind of based on what people have told us. But if you guys don't mind, like, let me show you. You know, you were talking about like some of that fragmentation, and you know, one way to solve it, a early step towards solving it, is something like what people have become more and more familiar with, these tokens that can kind of freely move between chains. And that's something that Hyperlane can enable through this warp route concept. And so I can show actually one of the largest IAN layer LRTs in Renzo's Easy. Well, it runs on Hyperlane. And one of the things that allows, so right here is,
Oh yeah, let me pull this back up. Okay, there we go. Sorry. Yeah, I
no,
just
you're good.
pulled the presentation back up.
So like right now, you could use something like, so for Renzo ZZ, that's at renzo.hyperlane.xyz. And you can basically deposit from any different chains. Like now I already have some easy on Blast, and say, oh, I want to get it to Optimism. But dang, you know, Blast has like used to have a 14-day withdrawal window. Now it's 7 days. Oh, maybe I just want to do that right now. So how about we do that? Like, okay, cool. Let's just do that. All right, we got my ledger. We're sending the transaction, and you know, we just paid about 90
Wow,
cents to
super
move
fast.
this amount, and we got ourselves to Optimism. Um, and you know what's happening in the background is that that easy ETH that I had on Blast just got burned on Blast and minted to my address on Optimism, and we can see, all right, cool. That took basically, uh, 15 something seconds. Perhaps we can make it a little faster. Um, but now we could go on something like unfortunately, the Explorer here is a little slow. But yeah, we're good. And so this is especially appealing for folks who their token really is the product. Right, so people sometimes talk about like, oh, I want to bridge my governance token everywhere. Like maybe you do. You know who really wants it? Someone whose token is their product. So whether you're a stable coin issuer, whether you're an LRT or any type of LST issuer, now with something like this, you can you can do that. You can have like that seamless type of connectivity between any chain that has Hyperlane. And perhaps the coolest things about it is that transfer that you just saw. Renzo plays a role in its security. So when we send that message, if you remember that little architecture diagram that we looked at before, you know, I I sent something that arrived at the mailbox, and then some security module looked at it. Well, that security module is a combination of Renzo and its operators. So it's not so much that you are just trusting this like nebulous thing in Hyperlane. You are trusting the issuer and their ability to validate that transaction. And so with Hyperlane, issuers can actually play a role, a varying degree. They can go all the way from zero involvement to 100% involvement, meaning it's really only them that are securing those transactions. And that's where really interesting things like the Hyperlane ABS can come in, and that level of kind of like fine-grained control and tuning is something that we think is pretty important, like as crypto is going to expand. And so by not kind of gatekeeping this, by letting anyone create the modules that they want, letting issuers run it almost independently, is I think how we get to some type of diminished fragmentation in this world where, like you said, right, okay, on the one hand, we know we're going to need a ton of chains to just be able to solve some of the scaling problems that crypto has.
Hmm.
But, well, every solution then introduces another problem. And that problem in this case is the additional fragmentation. How do we solve that? And we have a sense of like, hey, an open framework with open standards that can proliferate without any gatekeeping and without any, approval or say so by that framework's creators is something that can spread. And today, by like, if you look at like message activity, Hyperlane has become like the second largest messaging protocol, really only behind layer 0.
Wow. So we just looked at a bridge between Blast and which chain? I'm sorry, I missed that.
Optimism.
Okay, between bridge and if I guess this was essentially kind of a white label, not really a white label thing, but they were able to just build and have their own bridge between, that they control and that they deployed. They built their own front end, but anyone else could also maybe leverage that.
Absolutely, yeah. So if you go on the Hyperlane docs today, you could go on like the warp section, and it'll walk you through basically how to do this with the CLI between chains that Hyperlane's already on, and then how also basically to spin up your own front end that looks just like that one. Of course, you'll skin it to your own colors.
Yeah, that's cool.
But yeah,
what's really cool is like the idea that someone could, launch their own chain and now have interoperability, within the rest of the ecosystem, I guess, much more easily than maybe if something like this didn't exist. Because, with the whole like roll up as a service stuff you were talking about earlier, it's not just the protocol, it's all of the different pieces like oracles and bridges and I guess in this case, there's like a lot of different things that you could essentially build. When you think of like message passing, what is a use case that is not financial that might make sense for something like this? Or is it mainly
so the one, no, I'd say like you could, you do see some non-financial ones. I was gonna say oracles is one, but the actual uses of oracles tend to all be like financial related, where people are like relaying price data over. The one that we've seen kind of be interesting as a non-financial use case has been gaming related, where so one of the issues that people have had, like, has been this idea of like, oh, we're going to put games on chain, but like as someone who kind of grew up playing game, was a very, very perhaps unhealthily into World of Warcraft in my teenage years, and like the idea that something like that could run on a generalized like public chain is ludicrous. It's just not going to happen. But should we abandon it completely? Probably not. So now with the advent of rollups, you could see games transitioning over to like game specific chains where they can actually do a lot of that compute on chain because they're not competing for block space with others. It's really them and their usership that is occupying it. But now through Hyperlane, you can relay that data back to another chain, and especially as it concerns to some type of transactions or like things of higher stakes, right? So up until when I was like 16 years old, the most money I made in like a single event was when I sold a World of Warcraft character. Sold for $1,600. That was quite an achievement. Now, why did that person want to buy it? Like they wanted to buy it because like my character had some of the, like best equipment for its class in the North American servers. We're like, okay, cool. But if you couldn't, if like I were to rug them in that transaction, or like, if they couldn't actually verify kind of the state of the thing that they were buying, kind of worthless. And so what we're seeing with some of these games want to be doing is like, okay, now you can verify on a very strong settlement chain like Ethereum, the provenance of this, like the existence of this. You could use economic security from, again, something like the Hyperlane AVS to know like, hey, the state that chain says is there, it really is there. And someone's got a lot of money on the hook on it being there. So that's one non-financial case. Another that we've seen is basically chains that like have some type of unique primitive to them, being able to extend that to other chains. And so the most basic version that we've seen of that was someone created like a verifiable randomness function, but they wanted to bring that over to Ethereum. So They performed the calculation on that foreign chain and then brought the results over to Ethereum. Another really cool project is called Inco, which provides like private computation. And so you can send the ask from any chain because they're using Hyperlane. Computation happens privately on Inco, and then the result is returned to wherever it is that you like it. It could be on that same chain that you sent from, or it could be somewhere else where like that result is providing something useful. And so those are some of the ones, but I'd be lying to you if I told you it's not like majority financial related.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I mean, I think that that's just a large portion of what people use blockchains for, and
Indeed.
half of the value proposition. um, you know, Seamless interoperability between people being able to interact peer to peer. But I guess in terms of us, we're wrapping up. We're kind of getting close to being finished on time. I'm very curious about a couple of things that we can kind of run through quickly, I guess. First of all, how long have you all been building Hyperlane? How many people work there? What are the plans for the future?
Of course. So we've been working on this just under 3 years, and then came together kind of as a group of five at March of 22. That was when we really like kind of like formalized the thing. Today so right now there's like I'd say at least seven different companies that are making like very meaningful contributions to like Hyperlane as the framework. And at Abacus Works, the company that I run, there's about we just had an offer accepted, so that brings us to 20 people, which feels like a crazy number. So not the largest team out there, but we like to keep it small, tight, and really as elite as we can. So have a high bar for like who gets to be on the team, and then just people have a great time working with colleagues that they know are like of very high caliber. Insofar as like some things that are kind of coming up, you know, uh, we didn't really talk about, but those warp routes that I mentioned before, there's a feature that we call yield routes, which will let uh, anyone create a bridge that has the ability to earn yield on the collateral while it's deposited. So that's already been released, but some improvements are coming to it, like a natural rebasing feature that basically like, okay, now you have a balance, you've bridged USDC, call it, from Ethereum to your chain. Now it gets deposited in like some Aave vault. You earn some interest. Well, now with the rebasing, the interest is going to be reflected on your balance on the destination chain. It's a better like quality of life for the people who own those work routes. And then another feature that actually not released yet, but it's coming very soon, pretty relevant for Eigenlayer, is the ability to have like native restaking from L2s. And so that's coming hopefully very soon, being looked at right now.
Awesome. And then to wrap it up with the last question, this is more Eigenlayer like related for developers maybe looking to also build a product or a company on Eigenlayer like you all have. You all have been building. You all were one of the earliest builders in the ecosystem, and things have probably changed a lot in terms of the support that you can get and the documentation and the smart contracts and the reference architectures are all probably slightly or maybe even a lot better than they were back then, and we're still trying to make them even better and everything like that. But what are some of the I would say, what is some of the advice that you would give or like recommendations that you might give for developers that are just getting started building their first AVS?
I would say don't be shy is the most important one, right? Like ask for the help, you will get it. Like ask for the information as you need it. Let the team know where you're having struggles, because there's a lot that, and like I find this to be a useful piece of advice, just like generally, because people oftentimes are like they're so reticent to ask certain things or to dig for more. And uh, you guys have done a fantastic job in helping people get up to speed and like being very attentive to needs. And even if something isn't there right now. Well, like, how are they gonna know if you don't tell them? So just don't be shy. Like, you can get a lot from this group. And again, whether it's you two specifically, but also just like the broader team over there, and now with the folks at the foundation, there's really a lot of resources that you can get just by asking.
Awesome. I have one other question. So, like, what are some things you'd like to see being built with Hyperlane?
Ooh, great question. Um, I think I would love to just basically kind of call out on, if you are, there are plenty of people doing those more like financial use cases that we've talked about. I just love seeing more of the like random wacky stuff where it's like everyone is telling you this is a terrible idea, but you're like, fuck it. I don't care. It's a terrible idea. I'm just going ahead. I'm just going to do it. Those are some of the most um, fun things that you could see. And so whether it's for more gaming areas, kind of this notion of bringing functionality to chains that don't have it, because you can do that somewhere else, in basically importing functionality. Those are some things that I'd love to see more of that we just don't see enough right now.
Awesome.
sense.
Well, that was really great. That was really helpful. I think I learned a lot about Hyperlane, and I'm hoping a lot of other folks did as well. So for developers that want to get started building on Hyperlane, where should they go, and where, like, how should they get started?
Best thing to do is docs.hyperlane.xyz. Dive in there. Hopefully, it'll have most of the information you need to get started. If you just want to try your hand at some bridging, you can download the CLI and mess around with some warp routes. If you want to do like a more generalized message to just have function calls between your app on different chains, like look into the messaging interface. And then as you do that and you get a little bit more comfortable, I'm sure you'll have some more questions. So dive into the Hyperlane Discord. You'll find, thousands of engaged developers there, and you'll get help with and answers to your question, either from some of those other developers or from someone on like the Abacus Works team.
Awesome. Well, thanks, John. We really appreciate your time today. I know you have a lot going on and are busy, and appreciate you coming by and talking to us today about Hyperlane.
No, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And for everyone else watching, we will have another Infinite Layers next week. So thanks for stopping by.